The obese black woman stood on the auction platform for $2 while Arthur Morgan recognized the silver cross hanging around her neck. The crowd pressed closer in the Wyoming heat. Their voices carried the weight of cruelty and desperation. Abigail Washington kept her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the town square. The cross caught afternoon light against her dark skin. It had belonged to her grandmother. Now it swayed with each breath she took on the makeshift wooden stage. Dutch. Van der Berk raised his voice above the jeering crowd. The bidding had started at $20, then $15, then $10. Now the price dropped like a stone into still water. Arthur pushed through the mass of settlers and ranchers. His weathered hands trembled as he stared at the cross. The silver piece was hand-carved with intricate patterns. He had seen it before, years ago, when the world was different and he was younger. The woman on the platform looked nothing like the girl he remembered. Time and hardship had changed her body and face. But the cross remained exactly as it had been in his childhood memories. $2. Dutch called out the final bid from a man in a torn coat. The crowd laughed and made comments Arthur chose not to hear. His jaw tightened. His boots carried him forward through the dust. $5. Arthur's voice cut through the noise. Every head turned toward him. Dutch's eyes narrowed with sudden interest. The crowd fell silent. Abigail looked down at the man who had just bought her freedom. She did not recognize his face. The years had carved lines around his eyes and gray into his brown hair. His clothes marked him as a working man, a ranch hand or farmer. Dutch banged his gavel against the wooden podium. The sound echoed off the storefronts surrounding the square. Arthur approached the platform. Each step felt heavier than the last. The woman stepped down from the auction block. She moved with dignity despite everything that had just happened. Her dress was worn but clean. Her posture straight despite the weight she carried. Arthur removed his hat. His fingers worked the brim as he searched for words. The crowd began to disperse. Their entertainment was over, but Dutch Van der Berk remained. His eyes moved between Arthur and the cross. Abigail studied the man who had purchased her. Something familiar flickered in his face. A memory she could not quite place. The cross felt warm against her chest. It always did when trouble was near. Arthur gestured toward his horse and wagon. The ride to his ranch would give them time to talk or time to sit in silence. He was not sure which would be worse. The woman climbed into the wagon without assistance. Her movements were careful and measured. She had learned to take up as little space as possible. The world had taught her that lesson many times over. Arthur clicked his tongue and the horses moved forward. The town of Redemption Creek fell away. Behind them, dust rose from the wagon wheels. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of amber and gold. Neither spoke during the journey. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. Arthur's ranch appeared. In the distance, a modest house with a small barn and corral. Nothing fancy, but it was clean and well maintained. The woman looked at the property with careful eyes. She had learned to assess her situations quickly. This man seemed different from the others, quieter, more troubled. But she had been wrong about men before. Arthur helped her down from the wagon. His touch was gentle and brief. He showed her to the small guest room behind the kitchen. The space was simple but comfortable. A bed with clean sheets, a wash basin, a window that looked out toward the mountains. He left her alone to settle. The sound of his boots faded down the hallway. Abigail sat on the edge of the bed. Her hand went to the cross at her throat. The silver was warm from her skin. Something about this place felt familiar. The way the light fell through the window. The smell of the wood and leather. She had been in so many places since leaving her last town, but this felt different. Arthur stood in his kitchen and stared out at the gathering dusk. The woman in his guest room carried secrets in her eyes, the same secrets that had haunted his family for decades. The cross around her neck was proof of sins he had inherited but never committed. Tomorrow he would have to decide how much truth to tell her. Tonight he would try to sleep despite the weight of recognition. The past had found him in the form of a woman sold at auction for $2, and everything was about to change. Morning light filtered through the kitchen window where Arthur prepared breakfast. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. Eggs in the pan, coffee brewing. The routine kept his mind from wandering to the woman in his guest room. Abigail emerged dressed in the same worn dress from yesterday. Her hair was pinned back. With careful attention, the cross caught the early sunlight. Arthur's breath hitched at the sight of it. She accepted the plate of food without comment. They ate in silence. The scrape of forks against tin plates. The distant lowing of cattle. Words hung between them like morning mist. Arthur studied her face between bites, the curve of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders. Memory stirred in the depths of his mind. A young girl laughing by a creek, summer afternoons that felt endless. Abigail felt his gaze and looked up. Their eyes met across the small table. Recognition flickered there, uncertain, fragile. She set down her fork. "You knew me before." Her voice carried the weight of careful observation. Arthur's coffee cup trembled in his hands. He set it down without drinking. The past is complicated. His words came out rougher than intended. Abigail's fingers went to the cross at her throat. The gesture was automatic, protective. After breakfast, Arthur showed her around the property. The barn with its sweet smell of hay and leather. The vegetable garden behind the house. The corral where his horses grazed in the morning sun. She walked beside him with measured steps. Her breathing was labored, but she kept pace. Pride would not let her show weakness. Not to this man who carried secrets in his eyes. The work kept them busy through the morning. Arthur mended fence posts. Abigail gathered eggs from the henhouse. Simple tasks that required no conversation. But the silence stretched thin between them. By noon the heat had grown oppressive. They retreated to the shade of the front porch. Arthur brought out a pitcher of water. Abigail accepted a glass with grateful hands. A rider approached from the direction of town. Dust rose from his horse's hooves. Arthur's posture shifted. His hand moved instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the porch rail. Sadie Miller dismounted with fluid grace. Her saloon dress was practical rather than fancy. Her eyes swept the porch and landed on Abigail. Something passed between the two women, a current of recognition. "Dutch has been asking questions." Sadie's voice carried urgency beneath its calm surface. "About the cross, about why you bought her." Arthur's jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck stood out like rope. Abigail looked between them. The cross felt heavier against her chest. Sadie's gaze fixed on the silver pendant. Her face went pale. Her hand reached out, then stopped. The gesture hung in the air like a prayer. "Where did you get that?" The question came out as a whisper. Abigail's fingers closed around the cross. The metal was warm from her skin. "My grandmother." The words were barely audible. Sadie's eyes filled with tears she would not let fall. Arthur watched the exchange with growing unease. After Sadie left, Arthur retreated to his study. The small room smelled of dust and old paper. He pulled out a wooden box from beneath his desk. Inside lay a letter sealed with black wax. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, his father's final words. Written on his deathbed. Arthur had read it once and locked it away. Now circumstance demanded he face its contents again. The wax seal broke under his thumb. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. His father's handwriting was shaky but legible. Each word carved another line in Arthur's face. Outside his window, Arthur could see Abigail hanging laundry on the line. The simple domestic task looked peaceful. But peace was about to shatter. The letter contained truths that would change everything. That evening they sat on the porch as darkness gathered. Crickets sang in the grass. The first stars appeared. In the purple sky, Arthur's fingers drummed against his knee. Abigail watched him from the corner of her eye. His agitation was palpable. Whatever secrets he carried were pressing against his chest, demanding release. A coyote howled in the distance. The sound carried across the empty land, wild and mournful. Arthur stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the wooden planks. "I need to tell you something." The words came out strangled. Abigail's hand went to her throat. The cross felt cold against her palm. But before he could speak, hoofbeats approached. 3 riders materialized from the darkness. Their faces were hidden beneath hat brims. Arthur's hand moved to his sidearm. The riders stopped at the edge of the porch light. Their horses stamped and snorted. Steam rose from their flanks in the cool evening air. The lead rider tipped his hat. His smile was sharp as broken glass, his eyes fixed on Abigail. Then shifted. To Arthur, the message was clear without words. "We'll be watching." The rider's voice carried threat wrapped in politeness. Then they wheeled their horses and disappeared into the night. Arthur's hands shook as he checked the locks on all the doors. Abigail stood in the kitchen doorway. Her face was calm, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the doorframe. The house felt smaller with danger circling outside. Arthur loaded his rifle and set it by the front door. Abigail retreated to her room. The floorboards creaked under her weight. Sleep would not come easy tonight. Too many secrets pressed against the darkness. Too many truths waited to be spoken. And somewhere in the night men watched and waited for their chance to strike. Dawn broke gray and cold over the ranch. Arthur had not slept. The letter lay open on his desk. His father's confession stared back at him in faded ink. Each word was a stone in his chest. The Morgan plantation had been built on blood. Not just the blood of bondage, the blood of murder. Abigail's grandfather had discovered gold in the creek that ran through the property. He had died for that knowledge. Arthur's hands shook as he read the details again. The old man had been killed by Dutch van der Berk, then the plantation overseer. Now the man who ran Redemption Creek with an iron fist. The cross around Abigail's neck contained more than sentiment. Her grandfather had carved a map into the bay. Silver, the location of the gold mine. Hidden in plain sight for decades. Arthur folded the letter and locked it away. The weight of inherited sin pressed against his shoulders. He had been a child when the murder happened. But the blood money had paid for his education, his freedom, his life. Abigail was in the kitchen when he emerged. She moved with quiet efficiency, making coffee, slicing bread. The cross caught the morning light through the window. Her presence filled the small space, not with noise or movement, with something deeper. A sense of rightness that Arthur had never felt before. And now he would have to destroy it with truth. They ate breakfast in silence. The food tasted like ash in Arthur's mouth. Abigail watched him with careful eyes. She could sense the storm building inside him. After the meal, Arthur walked to the window. The horizon stretched endlessly under. A pewter sky. Somewhere out there, Dutch van der Berk was planning his next move. The riders last night had been a warning. Arthur Morgan. The voice came from outside, deep and familiar. Arthur's blood turned to ice water in his veins. Dutch van der Berk stood in the front yard. His black coat flapped in the morning wind. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, despite the early hour. Behind him stood 2 men, Micah Bell and another Arthur did not recognize. Abigail appeared at Arthur's shoulder. Her intake of breath was sharp. She recognized Dutch. The fear in her eyes was primal. Ancient, Dutch's smile was cold as winter stone. His gaze moved to the window where Arthur and Abigail stood. The cross glinted at her throat. Dutch's smile widened. "We need to talk." Dutch's voice carried across the yard. Arthur's hand moved to his rifle, but 3 against 1 were poor odds, especially with Abigail in the house. Arthur stepped onto the porch. His boots rang against the wooden planks. Dutch approached with measured steps. His men flanked him at a distance. "You bought something that belongs to me." Dutch's eyes were fixed on the cross visible through the window. Abigail had not moved from her position. "I paid fair price at your auction." Arthur's voice was steady, despite the fear crawling up his spine. Dutch chuckled. The sound held no warmth. "That trinket she wears." Dutch nodded toward the house. "It contains information that could be troublesome for both of us." Arthur's jaw tightened. Dutch knew about the map, had always known. The auction had been a trap, a way to flush out anyone who recognized the cross's true value. "You killed her grandfather." The words came out before Arthur could stop them. Dutch's expression did not change, but his hand moved closer to his gun. Ancient history. Dutch's voice was silk over steel. "What matters is the present and the future. That cross needs to disappear, along with anyone who understands its significance." Inside the house, Abigail pressed herself against the wall. Her hand clutched the cross so tightly the edges cut into her palm. She could not hear the words, but she could read the violence in their postures. Arthur's mind raced. Dutch would not leave without the cross, or without ensuring Arthur's silence. Permanently, the only choice was to fight or run. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the tension. A single rider came hard from the direction of town. Dust rose in clouds behind the galloping horse. Sadie Miller pulled up short of the group. Her face was flushed from the ride. Her eyes moved between Arthur and Dutch, reading the situation in an instant. "Sheriff's looking for you, Dutch." Her voice carried urgent warning. "That cattle rancher from the next county. He's making noise about his missing herd." Dutch's attention shifted to Sadie. The momentary distraction was all Arthur needed. He stepped backward toward the house. His hand found the door handle. "This is not over." Dutch's words carried the weight of prophecy. He mounted his horse with fluid grace. Micah Bell and the other man followed suit. They rode away at a measured pace. No hurry, no fear. Men who knew time was on their side. Arthur watched until they disappeared over the rise. Inside the house, Abigail waited. Her face was pale but composed. She had heard enough to understand the danger. The cross felt heavier around her neck. Arthur closed the door and turned the lock. The simple action felt inadequate against the threat they faced. Dutch would return, probably with more men. "You know who I am." Abigail's voice was barely above a whisper. Arthur nodded. The weight of recognition settled between them. "Your name was Sarah then?" Arthur's words came out rough. "You lived in the big house. Your grandfather worked the forge." Abigail's hand went to the cross. The memories came flooding back. A young white boy who had been kind to her, who had shared his books, who had disappeared when the world changed. Arthur Morgan. She spoke his name for the first time. The syllables felt foreign on her tongue. The boy she had known was gone, replaced by this weathered man with secrets in his eyes. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of years and loss. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, carrying the scent of distant rain. Arthur reached for the letter in his pocket, the confession that would explain everything. But before he could speak, Abigail turned toward the door. "I need to leave." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. Arthur stepped forward. His movement was instinctive, protective. "They'll kill you." The words came out strangled. Abigail's laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass. "They'll kill us both if I stay." She was already moving toward her room, gathering her few possessions. The cross swayed with each step. Arthur followed her down the hallway. His mind searched for arguments, for reasons to make her stay. But the truth was inescapable. His presence had brought death to her door. The bag was small. Everything she owned fit inside. A spare dress. A few personal items. The life of a woman who had learned to travel light. Arthur watched her pack. Each folded garment was another goodbye. Another piece of his heart torn away. The boy who had loved her was screaming inside his chest. Abigail shouldered the bag and walked toward the front door. Arthur's hand caught her arm. Gently, carefully, the touch burned through the fabric of her sleeve. Please, the word came out broken. Abigail looked up into his face, saw the pain there, the regret, the love that had survived decades of separation. But she also saw the danger. The cross around her neck was a death sentence. For both of them. And she had survived too much to die for the sins of the past. Sadie Miller's voice cut through the tension on the porch. Wait. Her hand reached toward Abigail's bag. The leather satchel trembled in Abigail's grip. Arthur stepped between them. His body formed a barrier against whatever new revelation was coming, but Sadie's eyes were soft, filled with tears she had held back too long. That cross belonged to my uncle. Sadie's words fell into the morning air, heavy as stones and still water. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. The silver pendant swayed against Abigail's chest, catching sunlight, throwing fractured light across the porch boards. Sadie's hand moved toward it, then stopped. Uncle Joshua carved it for his granddaughter. Sadie's voice cracked on the name. Before they killed him. Before everything changed. Abigail's legs gave out. She sank onto the porch step. The bag fell from her nerveless fingers. Arthur knelt beside her. His hand hovered over her shoulder. Your family. The words came out as a whisper. Sadie nodded. Her face was wet with tears she could no longer contain. I've been looking for you. Sadie's confession spilled out in broken pieces. Since I heard about the auction. Since I saw you on that platform. Arthur's mind reeled. The connections were falling into place. Sadie had not been a random ally. She had been searching, protecting, waiting for the right moment. The three of them sat in silence. The weight of shared blood and shared loss settled between them. A family broken by violence and scattered by time. Sadie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Her composure returned slowly, like armor being reassembled piece by piece. Dutch doesn't know about me. Her voice was steady again. He thinks all of Uncle Joshua's family died or disappeared. That's why I can move freely. Arthur stood and paced to the edge of the porch. His boots rang against the wooden planks. The sound echoed off the barn walls. He'll be back. Arthur's words carried certainty, with more men. He won't risk losing that cross again. Sadie's hand went to her coat pocket. She pulled out a small derringer. The metal gleamed in the morning light. Her fingers handled it with practiced ease. Then we need to be ready. Sadie's voice held steel beneath the softness. I won't lose any more family to that monster. Abigail looked up at the two. People who had become her protectors, her family. The bag at her feet suddenly felt foreign. The urge to run was fading. Tell me about him. Abigail's voice was barely audible. About our grandfather. Sadie's face softened. She settled onto the porch step beside Abigail. The years fell away as she spoke. He was a blacksmith, the best in 3 counties. His hands could shape metal into anything. Horseshoes, tools, beautiful things that lasted forever. Arthur listened from his position at the porch rail. The story painted pictures in his mind. The forge, the old man's weathered hands, the silver cross taking shape under careful blows. He found gold in the creek. Sadie's voice darkened. Planned to buy freedom for the whole family. But Dutch found out first. The morning wind carried the scent of rain from distant clouds. The sky was darkening. Storm weather approaching. Arthur pulled out his father's letter. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. His voice was rough as he read the relevant passages. Aloud, the confession detailed Dutch's crime, the murder, the cover-up, the gold mine hidden in the hills beyond the creek. Arthur's father had been a coward, but not a killer. Abigail's hand closed around the cross. The metal was warm from her skin. Inside the silver, her grandfather had hidden the map, carved in lines too fine to see without close examination. We can expose him. Arthur's words came out fierce. Take the letter to the sheriff. Show them the map. Make Dutch pay for what he did. Sadie shook her head. Sheriff Marston is honest, but he's outnumbered. Dutch owns half the town. The other half is too scared to speak. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was moving closer. Arthur felt the pressure change in his bones. The air grew thick and heavy. Then what do we do? Abigail's question hung between them. 3 people against a man who controlled everything. The odds were impossible. We fight smart. Sadie's voice carried conviction. Use what we know. Hit him where he's vulnerable. Make him desperate enough to make mistakes. Arthur's mind began working through possibilities. Dutch's weaknesses, his pride, his need for control. The secrets that could destroy him if exposed properly. The first raindrops struck the porch roof. Fat drops that splattered against the wooden shingles. The storm was almost upon them. Inside the house, they gathered around the kitchen table. Arthur spread out a map of the county. Sadie marked locations with careful precision. The saloon, the sheriff's office, Dutch's house on the hill. Abigail studied the cross in the lamplight. The carved lines were barely visible, but they were there, a path through the mountains. X marks where the gold waited. Arthur's finger traced the route. On the map, the mine was in a box canyon, accessible only through a narrow pass, easy to defend, impossible to find without the map. We need proof. Arthur's voice was thoughtful. Something the whole town can see, can't deny, can't ignore. Sadie's eyes lit up. The gold itself. If we can bring back enough ore, show everyone what Dutch killed for. The plan began to take shape. Dangerous, complicated, but possible. They would retrieve the gold. Gather witnesses. Force a confrontation Dutch could not. Control. Outside, the storm broke in earnest. Rain lashed against the windows. Lightning split the sky. The house shook with each thunderclap. Arthur checked the locks on all the doors, loaded his rifle, set it within easy reach. The storm would keep Dutch's men away tonight, but tomorrow would bring new dangers. Abigail prepared a simple meal. Her movements were sure and steady. The decision to stay had given her purpose, direction. For the first time in years, she felt rooted. Sadie cleaned her derringer with practiced motions. The small gun had saved her life more than once. Tomorrow, it might have to do so again. They ate by lamplight while the storm raged outside. The food was simple but satisfying, shared among family. United by purpose and blood, Arthur watched Abigail across the table. The woman she had become was stronger than the girl he remembered. Scarred but unbroken. Beautiful in ways that went deeper than skin. Her eyes met his over the flickering flame. Something passed between them, recognition, understanding, the love that had survived decades of separation. Sadie saw the exchange and smiled. Family was more than blood. It was choosing to stand together when the world tried to tear you apart. The storm continued through the night, but inside the small house, 3 people planned their war against injustice, against the man who had stolen their past, who would not be allowed to steal their future. Tomorrow they would begin the most dangerous journey of their lives, into the mountains, into the past, into a reckoning that was 30 years overdue. Dawn broke clear after the storm. The air smelled of wet earth and possibility. Arthur saddled. 3 horses while Abigail packed supplies. Their movements were efficient, purposeful. Sadie arrived as the sun cleared the horizon. Her face was grim. Dutch's men had been asking questions in town. About Arthur. About the woman he had bought at auction. The cross lay open on the kitchen table. Under magnification, the carved lines revealed their secrets. A map etched in silver by a dead man's hand. The path to justice wound through treacherous mountain passes. Arthur studied the route one final time. The box canyon was a day's hard ride through terrain that would challenge even experienced riders. But the gold waited there, proof of Dutch's crimes. They rode out in single file, Arthur leading, Abigail in the middle, Sadie bringing up the rear. The horses' hooves rang against stone as they climbed into foothills. The morning passed in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts. The weight of their mission pressed against their shoulders, but so did the promise of justice. By midday, they had reached the high country. Pine trees stretched toward a crystalline sky. The air was thin and sharp. Their breath misted in the mountain cold. Arthur called a halt beside a clear stream. The horses drank deeply. Their flanks steamed in the cool air. Abigail dismounted slowly. Her body was not accustomed to long rides. Sadie checked their back trail. No signs of pursuit. But Dutch would realize their destination eventually. Time was their enemy as much as terrain. They pressed on through the afternoon. The path grew narrower, more treacherous. Loose rocks skittered into unseen depths. The horses picked their way carefully. Abigail's hands were white on the reins. But she did not complain, did not ask to rest. The strength that had carried her through slavery and widowhood served her. Now the sun was westering when they reached the canyon entrance, a narrow cleft in the rock face, hidden by shadow and cleverly positioned boulders. Easy to miss unless you knew exactly where to look. Arthur dismounted and studied the opening. The cross had been accurate. Every detail matched the silver map. Joshua's final gift to his family. Vengeance carved in precious metal. Inside the canyon, the walls rose sheer on both sides. The path was barely wide enough for a single horse. Their voices echoed off the stone, multiplied and distorted. The mine entrance was exactly where the map indicated. A dark mouth in the canyon wall. Wooden supports framed the opening, weathered but still sound after 30 years. Arthur lit a torch from his saddlebags. The flame danced in the mountain wind. Shadows writhed against the canyon walls. The darkness beyond the mine entrance seemed to swallow light. They entered together. The tunnel sloped downward into the earth. Their footsteps echoed in the confined space. The torch flame flickered with each breath of air. The gold was there. Not nuggets or dust, but a rich vein running through the quartz. Gleaming in the torchlight, worth a fortune. Worth killing for. Arthur broke off samples with his knife. The metal was pure, untouched, a testament to Joshua's skill and Dutch's greed. Each piece was evidence of murder. They worked quickly, gathering what they could carry. The samples would be proof enough. The mine itself was secondary to the justice. They saw it. Outside the canyon, the sun was setting. Long shadows stretched across the valley floor. They had what they came for. Now came the dangerous part. The ride back was tense. Every shadow could hide an ambush. Every sound might signal pursuit. But the mountain paths remained empty, silent except for wind through pine boughs. They reached Arthur's ranch as full darkness fell. The house was dark, undisturbed, but something felt wrong. The silence was too complete, too heavy. Arthur's hand went to his rifle. Sadie drew her derringer. Abigail stayed mounted, ready to flee if necessary. The gold samples weighed heavy in their saddlebags. A figure emerged from the barn, tall and lean, badge glinting in the moonlight. Sheriff John Marston stepped into the yard. His face was grave. "Dutch knows where you went." Marston's voice carried urgency. "He's gathering men, maybe a dozen. They'll be here before dawn." Arthur's jaw tightened. The trap was closing. But they had the evidence now, the proof of Dutch's crimes. The question was whether they could survive long enough to use it. Inside the house they spread the gold samples on the kitchen table. Each piece caught the lamplight, threw back golden fire. The sheriff examined them with practiced eyes. "This is enough." Marston's voice held conviction. "Enough to hang Dutch Van der Berk, if we can get it to the territorial judge." Sadie's laugh was bitter. "Getting it there is the problem. Dutch owns the roads, the telegraph, everything between here and the territorial capital." Arthur stood at the window, watching the darkness. Somewhere out there Dutch's men were riding, coming to silence the only witnesses to his crimes. The house felt fragile. Wooden walls against determined killers, but it was all they had, all they could defend. The gold samples represented justice, but justice was worthless if they died protecting it. Abigail joined Arthur at the window. Her hand found his. The touch was warm, steady, a promise that they would face whatever came together. The cross hung at her throat, catching lamplight, a reminder of the grandfather she had barely known. The man who had died for the gold that now offered their only chance at justice. Marston checked his rifle, counted his ammunition. One lawman against Dutch's army. The odds were impossible. But sometimes impossible was all you had. Outside the wind picked up, rattling the windows, carrying the scent of dust and horses, the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Dutch's ultimatum was riding toward them through the night. Arthur blew out the lamp, plunged the house into darkness. Through the windows they could see torches moving across the valley. Coming closer, the final confrontation was at hand. They took positions at the windows, Arthur with his rifle, Sadie with her derringer, Marston with his lawman's resolve, Abigail with the gold samples. The evidence that would either save them or die with them. The torches stopped at the edge of the yard. Dutch's voice carried across the darkness, cultured, reasonable, the voice of a man who had never doubted his own power. "You have something that belongs to me." The words echoed off the barn walls. "Come out. We can discuss this rationally." Arthur's finger tightened on the trigger. Discussion was the last thing Dutch intended. This was about silence, about burying the past forever. The siege of Arthur Morgan's ranch was about to begin. Arthur's voice cut through the darkness. "We're not coming out, Dutch. The gold stays here, along with the truth." The silence stretched thin. Then Dutch's laugh echoed across the yard, rich, amused, the sound of a man who held all the cards. "You always were stubborn, boy." Dutch's voice carried memories of plantation days, when Arthur was young, when Dutch held the whip. Sheriff Marston moved to the back window. His badge caught starlight. 3 more riders had circled behind the house. The trap was complete. Abigail clutched the gold samples to her chest. Each piece was a fragment of her grandfather's legacy, of justice too long delayed. Her breathing was steady despite the fear. Sadie's derringer gleamed in moonlight. The small gun had 2 shots, not enough against Dutch's army, but enough to make a difference when it mattered most. The standoff continued through the long hours. Dutch's men held their positions, patient, professional. They had done this before. Would do it again. Dawn crept across the valley floor. Gray light filtered through the windows. Arthur could see Dutch's face now, older, harder, but still carrying that same cruel smile. The morning brought visitors. Townspeople drawn by curiosity, by the promise of violence. They gathered at a safe distance, watching, waiting. Dutch saw the crowd and his smile widened. An audience would serve his purposes. Whatever happened here would become legend. His version of truth. Arthur made his decision. The standoff would not end in the house. Too many innocents could be hurt. Too much could go wrong. The confrontation needed to be public. He opened the front door, stepped onto the porch. The rifle remained in his hands but pointed down. A gesture of parley, not surrender. Dutch dismounted with fluid grace. His black coat was immaculate despite the long night. His silver hair perfectly groomed. The image of respectability. They met in the center of the yard. Two men carrying decades of history, of guilt and anger and unfinished business. The crowd pressed closer. Arthur's voice carried across the morning air. This man killed Joshua. Washington murdered him for gold, then covered it up for 30 years. Dutch's expression never changed. The smile remained fixed, confident. He had survived accusations before. Would survive this one too. Prove it. Dutch's voice was silk over steel. Show them proof, not stories, not ancient grudges. Facts. Arthur pulled out his father's confession. The paper rustled in the morning breeze. His voice was steady as he. Read the damning words aloud. The crowd stirred. Murmurs rippled through the gathered townspeople. Dutch's smile flickered. The first crack in his armor. Sheriff Marston emerged from the house. The gold samples glinted in his hands. Evidence. Of the crime. Of the motive. Of 30 years of lies. Abigail stepped onto the porch. The cross at her throat caught the morning light. She spoke for the first time. Her voice carried across the yard. My grandfather carved this cross. Put a map inside. Dutch killed him for it. Stole our family's future. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Uglier. Dutch's hand moved toward his gun. But too many eyes were watching. Too many witnesses. Sadie appeared beside Abigail. Her family connection was clear in their shared features. In the way. They stood together, united against injustice. Dutch's composure cracked further. The crowd was turning. He could feel their mood shifting. The respect he commanded was built on fear. Fear could be overcome. Micah Bell stepped forward, his hand on his gun, ready to end this with violence. But Marston's badge gleamed in the morning sun. The law was present. Dutch raised his voice, tried to regain control. These are lies, fabrications, the ravings of bitter people seeking revenge. But the evidence was there, the confession. The gold, the map carved in silver. The crowd could see truth when it was laid bare. Arthur's voice cut through Dutch's protests. The mine is still there, in the box canyon. Anyone can see it. Touch it. Verify what we're saying. The crowd began to move toward the mountains, toward verification. Dutch's control was slipping away, grain by grain, word by word. Dutch's mask finally fell. The cultured gentleman vanished, replaced by the brutal overseer who had wielded power through fear. His hand went to his gun. Sheriff Marston was faster. His weapon cleared leather before Dutch's fingers found his grip. The lawman's voice was steady, authoritative. Dutch van der Berk, you're under arrest for the murder of Joshua Washington. Drop your weapon. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows, revealing truth in harsh light. Dutch's empire crumbled around him, his men scattered. Unwilling to die for a lost cause, Micah Bell spurred his horse away from the yard. Disappearing into the distance, Dutch stood alone, surrounded by the community he had controlled. They saw him clearly. Now, not as a leader, as a murderer, a thief, a coward. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming, the confession, the gold, the testimony of survivors. Justice moved with unusual speed. Dutch van der Berk was sentenced to hang, but he died in his cell before the sentence could be carried out. Some said his heart gave out. Others whispered of different causes. Arthur and Abigail were married in the church, the same building where Dutch had once held court, where fear had ruled. Now love filled the space. The gold funded their school, the Washington Morgan Academy, where children of all colors learned together, where the future was built on foundations of hope. Sadie ran the saloon with a fair hand. Her establishment became a gathering place, where stories were shared, where truth was valued over profit. Sheriff Marston kept the peace, with justice rather than fear. The town prospered under his steady hand. Redemption Creek lived up to its name. Years passed. The academy grew. Children who had never known slavery learned beside those who remembered chains. The past informed the present, did not dominate it. Abigail wore her grandfather's cross every day. The silver was polished bright. The map no longer needed. The gold had served its purpose. Justice had been won. Arthur found peace in teaching, in watching young minds grow, in the quiet moments with his wife. The boy who had loved her still lived in his heart. The story spread beyond Redemption Creek, of courage in the face of corruption, of love surviving injustice, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The Washington Morgan Academy became a symbol of what was possible when people chose truth over comfort, when they stood together against those who would divide them. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.